If you have topics you would like to have us discuss on the Aging Well podcast, please click on the links in the episode description to send us a text or record your message or comments. We'd love to hear from you and how we can help you age well. If you benefit from the Aging Well podcast and would like to support the content financially, please click on the Support the Show link or support our affiliates and advertisers. Welcome to the Aging Well podcast. I'm Jeff Armstrong here with Corbin Bruton. In this and the episodes that follow, we will share candid discussions on aging and hear from the experts. We are here to inform and encourage as we experience, aging. This is part 5 on our series, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Aging. The habits to be discussed include keeping self-esteem, maintaining fitness, being busy, remaining connected, being happy and making others happy, fighting for rights, and planning for fourth age. In this episode, we discuss habit 6, fighting for rights. So we're on the 6th habit of highly effective aging. What is habit 6?
Well, according to the article titled 7 Habits for Third Age Elderly, habit 6 is fighting for rights. The author writes, "This is crucial for survival in life. There are many times that elders are attempted to be abused or not given their proper legitimate rights. Sometimes they are abused as others feel that elders are weak and cannot fight back. It is time we change the stereotype and take care of our own destiny. Wherever we feel that due share is not given, or our rights are snatched or attempts are made to abuse us, we as elders should fight back for our rights through all means, including legally if need be. Idea is simple. Let us take care of our own destiny." So, what rights are important for aging well?
Well, according to ChatGPT, which is becoming my habit now to go to ChatGPT for some information, several rights are important for aging well and ensuring the well-being and dignity of older individuals. These rights include the right to health, the right to autonomy and self-determination, the right to safety and security, the right to social inclusion and participation, the right to housing and adequate standard of living, the right to financial security, and the right to dignity and respect.
Let's tackle these one at a time. ChatGPT suggests that older individuals have the right to access healthcare services that cater to their specific needs, including preventative care, medical treatment, and long-term care, including physical, mental, and social well-being.
Yeah, and who could disagree with that? And I think, as we age, obviously the need for healthcare services is going to increase. But more importantly, I think it's important to provide access, as we've been talking about throughout this series, throughout the 4 ages, to provide access for adequate preventative care. We need to be focused early on in first age to provide physical activity for children and proper nutrition and dietary services and things that are going to prevent future diseases. Same thing going into as we work. We need to have access to fitness facilities, communities that are more active, and so on. And then in third age as well, beginning to understand and take advantage of our opportunities for proper preventative health care. And then once we get into fourth age, then obviously the need for specific health care, medical treatment, long-term care, and those types of things are going to be important. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, basically everything that you just said, you kind of nailed it. You kind of took my thoughts for me on that one.
Hopefully there's not too much to really think about this. I mean, it just seems like a pretty obvious right to healthcare services, but I think we have to be a little bit cautious about this idea of right to health care without considering the broader implications for it. For example, Oregon this past year changed its constitution to guarantee health care as a human right, which is great. Yes, it's a human right, but without having some dollars going toward or planning going toward preventative care, the the risks of that destroying the economy is just tremendous.
I also think it needs to be a right. I've worked in assisted livings, independent livings. I've worked in adult foster homes, and there is there is a form of, I don't want to say abuse per se, but there is a form of neglect. Even with certain staff, they have the best intentions. They really do, and they love these residents. They care about them, but people on that top of that food chain, that they kind of see them. From my experience, they kind of see them as just numbers, and it's like, come on, we got to get them in the door. We got to put them on a certain schedule, and then we got to move on to the next. We got to go, 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 go. But those individuals do have rights. And here in Oregon, we're actually pretty fortunate where the state will actually just come in randomly. They don't have to let you know, they don't have to give you a heads up. And they come in to say, hey, are these residents, are their needs met? Are you guys holding up to the state standards? If a resident is saying no, are you still forcing them to do something? If they're not there cognitively, are you at least helping assist them in a way that they have they still have their human rights and their dignity and decency at the exact same time? Like, it's there. Yeah, man, this is such a tough subject to dive in on. But yes, I do think that rights are really important in this matter.
Yeah, and I see where you're coming from. And I refer the listeners back to episode 5, too, when we had Karen Brown Wilson and Walter Dawson on to talk about compassion, exhaustion, and elder care. There's a lot of challenges in providing adequate care for the older population because A, there's not enough people going into the fields necessary to provide those services. The pay is not great enough
It's
because
not.
again, we we don't emphasize that as one of the more important areas of healthcare. Instead, we spend you know, so many billions of dollars treating preventable disease throughout the lifespan. And then there's not enough that's left in order to provide adequate care for those in the final stages of life. And I think it's kind of really sad to think of it that way. And I think we, as compassionate human beings, need to be considering our elderly much more. And as individuals, also be considering what impact are we going to have on society as we age. And that's, I think, an important purpose for having this podcast is when we're talking about aging well, we want to be able to age to a point where we are going to be as less of a burden as possible on society as we attempt to age well.
Yeah, and this is just some unsolicited advice, but if you're in a predicament where you're thinking about placing your loved one into a care facility, and you're getting that tour, there's two things, in my opinion, that I would just double check on. One, look at the activities department. Is there activities filled with enough diversity or enough um, where it's several different things across the board? Do they have outings? Do they have more social events so your loved one can get involved in something, or like join a hobby or an activity, or develop that social group? And then two, look at the nutrition aspect. Look at the food and the dietary. Look at the menu, because a lot of times in those places, they'll say, yeah, we have all these good food and we'll take care of it and we'll meet those dietary needs of your loved one. But unfortunately, when you're cooking for an entire facility, sometimes those dietary needs might mesh with someone else's dietary needs. And if your loved one is, say, hypothetically on a low sodium diet, well, that doesn't, I mean, they're still getting from the giant food meal that everyone else is getting. That makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think when we get into the seventh habit, we'll be talking about much of that in more detail because we'll be talking about preparing for fourth age. And I think that's an important aspect of as we move into really even before third age, we should be looking at having a plan for the inevitable decline in death, and how are we going to manage that in a way that we are adequately cared for, that our needs are met, that we limit disease as we get older. And when we get to a point where we need long term care, that's going to be available to us. And I think, we'll get into a little bit more discussion about, I believe they're called continued care retirement communities or CCRCs. And the better of those communities that we could provide access for people, the better ultimately fourth age is going to be for individuals. And those are communities where they'll move in when they are relatively healthy. They've entered into retirement age. And as health may decline or they have specific needs, those communities are capable of meeting those needs where you can move into, if somebody has Alzheimer's or, some form of dementia or Parkinson's or other conditions that come along with aging, that their loved one can still kind of remain nearby, living in their apartment or whatever it might be, and that more extended care and even hospice can be available there on facilities. So we'll talk more about that, but I think that kind of falls into fighting for that right to have adequate health care and healthcare services and meeting those needs. And so there's a couple of things really involved in this idea of fighting for access to healthcare services. I mean, obviously, with access to healthcare, they need to have access to comprehensive healthcare services, um, and especially specific to their needs. And it's important that they take action in that. I mean, it's very rare that we don't have the right to health care. I mean, we almost have too much access to health care, and that's part of some of the problem in our healthcare system is that a lot of the unnecessary access to health care takes away from the availability of services to people that really more dramatically need those services. But we need, regular checkups. And so that level of care should be provided to all individuals, really. I mean, throughout the four ages, we need to have access to regular prescriptive checkups, preventative screenings, treatment for their existing conditions. I think that's where our priorities should be made. And looking at, okay, what can we do in our communities to get us healthier? And we talk a lot about that throughout the podcast, that there's a lot that we can do through exercise, diet, sleep patterns, building communities that have regular access to physical activity. All of that can, it costs some money up front, but it's going to save billions of dollars down the road. And then most importantly for the aging population is self-advocacy. They have to understand that they have the rights to communicate to their doctors. Too many people just take their doctor's word. And I'm not one of those people. I respect the medical profession, but I think there's a lot of dingbats out there that are in medicine that they don't wholly understand things. And quite frankly, I don't like a doctor that doesn't understand the role of exercise and diet and rest in treating things. And I finally have, I think, a pretty good um, physician. I don't see enough, but again, I don't feel like I need to see him as much. But at least he understands that, I understand the role of exercise and that's going to be my priority step in terms of treating any ailments that I might have. And so the older or aging adult needs to understand that, when they go to a doctor and they're diagnosed with something, they have a right to a second opinion. They have right to multiple opinions.
Right.
They need to understand that they can access a lot of information, through Google, through WebMD, all these different sources that are readily accessible to them, that they can confirm what the doctor's talking about and, you know, participate in the decision-making process. Don't let the doctor just dictate everything. And, when we get to fourth age, as best as possible, families need to understand that the decision has to come down to the individual, not based on what they want for that person. That makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. I think David Kravitz and Larry Wolf actually mentioned that in their book Super Aging. We've had them on the podcast, and they talk about how the older generations, when they would hear one thing from their doctor and that was it, they're just, oh, okay, that's it, that's all it is. And then um, came in that baby boomer generation and that Gen X generation, and it's like, well, hold on now, that's not necessarily right. I don't feel like I have that. And that's what's cool about your rights. Your rights, you don't have to necessarily listen to your doctor. You have the right to get that second opinion. I recently just heard a quote, and it was, everything we hear is not always fact. It's just an opinion, and everything we see isn't truth. It's just a perspective. And I think that kind of ties in with this. It's, you're hearing something from a doctor. It doesn't have to be fact. Maybe that doctor overlooks something. You have the right to do your own research. You have your right to get that second opinion. I think it's pretty cool that we're talking about that today.
Yeah, and I think people need to understand that doctors are, they're trained in the medical profession, but they haven't received all of the possible training that they could possibly benefit from. I mean,
Right.
I think for myself personally, I think every doctor, prospective doctor, should go through an exercise science program and get more training in nutrition and the role of physical activity and exercise in preventing many of the pathologies that they will encounter. That's my personal opinion, since you were talking about opinions. But I do think it benefits them much more than, say, a biology or chemistry degree where all they're learning about is, chemical formulas, or, taking a bunch of plant classes, and that's supposed to transfer over to a better understanding of medicine. Doctors need to understand people, and we need to understand, as we've talked about on the podcast before, that the conditions that we deal with in medicine are of a biomechanical, psychosocial nature, and we need to treat them as such. But we also have to understand that we don't know everything.
Right.
And at best, a diagnosis is an intelligent guess at what's wrong with that individual. We can run countless tests, and sometimes we run too many tests. Some doctors get a little bit overzealous with the amount of different tests that they do. They get a new piece of equipment. We got to try it out. But if you ever notice, when you go to the doctor and they check your symptoms, and then they usually leave the room and then they come back in, I guarantee what they're doing out in the hallway there is they're checking on their electronic device what those symptoms are and what potential diagnoses that might be. More and more medical practices are using ChatGPT, and they're looking at ways that can effectively help in the diagnosis. And it's just because there's just way too much out there to know everything, and doctors don't want to miss what they can miss, and because they don't necessarily have experience with the exact symptoms and conditions and medical history that you are dealing with, they may miss something, but some other doctor might have a different perspective, a different experience, may be able to catch something. And so advocate for it. And you're not necessarily challenging your doctor by saying, I want a second opinion. You're basically just making sure that you're getting the adequate care that you need in order to be appropriately treated for whatever you're dealing with. So let's consider the right to autonomy and self-determination. Older adults should be able to make decisions about their own lives, including matters related to their health, living arrangements, finances, personal preferences. They should be empowered to participate in decisions that affect their well-being and have their choices respected. Thoughts on that?
No, I 100% agree. I actually at work, and this is going to tie in with this, I promise. At work, I just took a kind of like an emerging manager class, a class about coaching staff instead of just blah 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 blah. And it was one of the things that they said is the greatest motivator for an individual is autonomy, right? Allowing them to be a part of the process you see people in a work environment become more proud of the work that they do. They feel like they're a part of something. They're building that more team harmonizing thing because they don't feel like just a number. They don't feel like a bot. They feel like an individual with their own thoughts and their own abilities and their own skill sets. And if that transpires inside of a work environment, of course it's going to transition into that daily life, especially as an individual is going through that third stage of life or that fourth stage of life. They want to know that their opinion matters, that their talents matter, their skill set, what they are bringing to the table matters, and they want to be a part of that same process. So yeah, I do think autonomy plays a huge role in that psychosocial, physical realm of the individual's own individuality, I guess we'll say.
Yeah, I think it's really sad when you see fourth agers that are kind of sitting in a chair and their kids are the ones that are like engaging with the doctor and making all the decisions and completely kind of ignoring what this individual wants. And older adults, they can certainly engage in their advanced care planning as best as their cognitive abilities will permit. And we need to try and find ways to communicate with them to determine what are their preferences in medical treatment. And sometimes, it might be that you're not picking up on the fact that they're very uncomfortable. You might have somebody who's in advanced stages of dementia, but you can still see that they're uncomfortable with certain aspects of their treatment. That needs to be respected. If it gets to a point where somebody's care needs to be kind of at more appointed to some kind of healthcare proxy, somebody who is going to be making some of those decisions for them, it's important that the right family member is the person chosen
Right.
to make those decisions. It's not just, it doesn't go on seniority. It doesn't go on who lives the closest to them, even per se. I mean, but sometimes that's kind of the case where it has to be that person who has most access to the doctors and so on. But I think collectively as families, we need to work together, engage together. And it's so much easier now with the technology that we have available. When my mom was in her final days, my siblings and I were regularly communicating with her through, FaceTime and being able to discuss things and make decisions with her present in the room and with her giving her input. And it was her input that was ultimately the final decisions that were being made. And also, it comes down to legal measures as well. Older, you know, third and fourth agers need to understand that they need to prepare for the inevitable legal issues that might come up in terms of guardianship, powers of attorney, and those types of things, and designating who should be that person. And again, that should come down to that individual's decision. And so this is communication we should be having with our fourth age, third age parents. I mean, even in third age, we should be communicating with our children. This is what I want. This is what I expect when I get to this point, if I ever get to this point. And, my family, I think, already kind of knows much of my end of life decisions, but they're difficult decisions and conversations that have to be had, but they need to be had when everybody is of sound mind and the ability to have those discussions.
What's crazy is just like the other habits that we've discussed, how it doesn't just have to be in third or fourth age. You can start it in that first and second age as well. It's really similar because autonomy is huge. You see teenagers coming in, say to get their driver's license, and their parent is at the counter answering all the questions for them while the teenager's just standing there. There may be a situation where maybe an individual needs to make that decision to go off to college, but the parents have filled out the application already. But maybe that individual doesn't want to go to college. If they would have just had that conversation or allowed that teenager to have their own voice and make those decisions on their own, I think there's a lot of literature out there that talks about those individuals that that know who they are and know their own thought process and can verbally communicate that become a lot more successful. I think that this is a good way to transition into that third and fourth age as well. If you communicate with me of what you want and what your needs are, now in a situation where, let's say, I become your power of attorney because we've had that conversation, and let's just say, hypothetically speaking, you're in a you're in a stage of life where maybe your verbal communication is limited due to whatever, or maybe you're slowly developing Alzheimer's or dementia. Now you need that voice, you need that advocate. But because you had the autonomy beforehand to have that open discussion of what you really, really wanted, now I can advocate for you. So, and I also liked how you said it shouldn't be the person that's lives closest to the individual, or it shouldn't be the oldest child taking it on. It should be whoever that parent or that loved one or aunt or whatever the case may be, whoever was the closest with them, whoever had those open discussions with them, whoever allowed that person to have their autonomy at that time and knows them very well. I think that that plays a huge role in these next steps of life.
But I think too, when we think of the right of autonomy and self-determination, we can't delay that until the later years of life because, as Forrest Gump said, it happens, and somebody can, you know, go immediately from first age to fourth age in some situations when
Totally.
there's certain debilitating diseases and things like that. And so, if we delay those conversations, you could find yourself in a situation where you're having to make decisions for somebody not knowing really what their choices would be.
At one of the assisted livings I worked at, we had an individual, he had full on Alzheimer's at the age of 53. I mean, very young to that, but you're right. Uh, first stage and third age aren't really as far apart as people think they are. Anyways, let's dive back into this. Older individuals must fight for their rights to safety and security. According to ChatGPT, older individuals have the rights to live in an environment that is safe and free from abuse, neglect, discrimination, and violence. They should be protected from any form of exploitation or mistreatment, both within their homes and in institutional settings. How does one do this?
I discussed my epigenetics test with True Diagnostic co founder Hannah Wendt in episode 162. Epigenetic testing measures baseline and changes in your pace of aging, giving you the power to steer your anti aging or health and wellness journey in the right direction. I learned that I am aging well. Click on the affiliate link in the episode description, use the promo code AGEWELL, and receive a 12% discount on your epigenetics test and monitor your pace of aging. Yeah, I think that can be a bit challenging because in many situations, the older adult is, maybe they were raised in a situation where they weren't permitted to speak up and speak out, and so that continues throughout second, third age, and on into fourth age. Um, the best way, first of all, is just to be aware that they can report and how they can report, and also to have the appropriate support networks. And again, that goes into kind of next, right, when we get into that about social inclusion and participation. I mean, having community, I think that's important. And I think we've lost that in our communities a little bit. As we talked about in one of the recent episodes about, we no longer have the front porch and we no longer have some of that community connectedness within our neighborhoods. It used to be people would check in on the elderly that live nearby. We don't see that as much anymore. And you need to have people who respect the safety and security of our elderly and who are going to be willing to kind of check in on them, provide assistance regularly, ask if they need help, and to report if they see something that's a little bit out of the ordinary. It appears that your neighbor is being abused or exploited by their kids. report it. Do something about
Right.
it. Don't just sit there and, complain to somebody else or just keep it to yourself. You got to be aware of what's going on in your communities and with your neighbors, but also individually, we have to understand what our rights are and that our children or our neighbors do not have the right to take advantage of us. And, there's so many poor adults that are like getting sucked into some of these phone scams and all that other kind of stuff. And we got to be aware of that as we're watching our older family members and educating them that no, mom, come on, that's a scam. You don't need to be sending money to that prince in Nigeria, whatever it might be. And so it's really just a lot more of a matter of educating and making them aware and having the opportunities and proper services within our communities to protect our elderly.
Well, and then also we're kind of living in an age where we can double up on the protection. We may not be around our loved ones all the time, but they have those little ring cams for outside of wherever they're living, but they also have the opportunity to put those inside as well. So kind of like a baby monitor or a security camera that you can watch on your loved one, whether they're being mistreated by, say, one of their caregivers, or if they have a fall on their own in their accident and you're not able to get there. Well, you can at least view that and go through the proper channels to get the help that they need. All right. So older adults have the right to social inclusion and participation. What do you think this means?
According to ChatGPT, older individuals should have opportunities for social interaction, engagement, and participation in their communities. They have the right to maintain and develop relationships, participate in cultural and recreational activities, and be included in decision making processes that affect their lives. So, what do you think about that?
Honestly, I'm thinking back when I was an activities director, we kind of had a resident town hall meeting. We had certain individuals where they wanted to be included. And this was one of the state guidelines where we would hold this committee meeting, and the residents, some of them would hold no punches and really tell staff what they wanted from them or how the staff wasn't doing their job. But they also would open up and they'd say, hey, we would like to add these to the activities list, or we would like to add this to the menu. And, we would like to have more items that are intergenerational where we get younger people to come in, or maybe we can go there. And it was really cool because there were certain individuals where we would put fundraisers on, and we would do everything that the residents would want or need. Some of them wouldn't come to those events, but a good majority of them came to those residential council meetings where they felt, this is my time, this is my voice, I'm going to be a part of something greater for this whole community. And just seeing that spark come back in a lot of them was, I mean, it happened once a month, but it was also one of my favorite things, just seeing that spark come back in their eyes.
Yeah, I think this is kind of a twofold issue. I think on one hand, our communities need to provide the adequate opportunities for seniors to engage in their communities, both within their own age groups, but also within their common likes. I mean, it's a great opportunity for older people to teach younger people some of the skills and the talents that they have. Should be opportunities for them to volunteer. I think senior centers are a great thing. I've mentioned a few times before working at the Jewish Community Center in Pittsburgh, doing personal training. And I thought those were great facilities for those older individuals to really interact together, to get physical activity, to have social connection, and so on. So we need to have those types of things available. We also have to create programs that bring the generations together. So maybe opportunities in our schools for the seniors to come in and participate in, some of the activities that the kids might be doing in school, and
Mm.
for the kids to be able to learn and to respect and to interact with the elderly. But bottom line is that the older individuals need to learn to advocate for themselves. And there are numerous different organizations that provide advocacy for the elderly. I mean, probably one of the biggest ones in the US is the AARP. And you mentioned earlier David Kravitz. He's actually got his exact title. I think he's like the chief information officer, I believe it is, for the CARP, which is
Canadian.
the Canadian equivalent to the AARP. But those can provide opportunities for advocacy in our governments for the needs of the elderly. And so I think participation in those are of great benefit. Yeah. So anything else?
We don't just have to do this in our third or fourth age. We can start doing it in our first and second age. And I'd strongly recommend that anyone in those first or second age groups to volunteer at a senior center, to volunteer at an assisted living or an independent living, and just see things from a different perspective, learn things from that older generation. You'd be surprised how much they can actually teach you, not just historical events, but also just perspectives and life lessons that they can pass this wisdom and knowledge onto you that you might not have even thought about. And it's really cool and it's really eye-opening.
Yeah, I think we could advocate from a very early age for preparing for our senior years.
Older adults also have the right to housing and adequate standard of living, meaning that older individuals have the right to safe, accessible, and affordable housing options that meet their needs. They should have access to essential services, including water, food, and sanitation, to ensure an adequate standard of living.
Older individuals, they have the opportunity to kind of determine their progression towards fourth age. And so, what are the housing needs that are going to suit their needs? And that's where I think the CCRCs are really important because they can allow an individual to have a community where they can progress from where they're much more autonomous to where they need a bit more assisted living to where they might be in more hospice care. And so researching early in, really second age is when we should be considering what do we want to do into retirement and on into fourth age, because we can't wait until we're retired to say, okay, now what am I going to do? You have to start looking at preparing both financially and kind of mentally and physically for how you're going to live in retirement. Do you want to stay where you're at, or do you want to move like, all of my wife's family pretty much retires to Florida. That's kind of what you do in New York. I always say, you don't move to Florida to live, you move to Florida to die. Um, Hopefully many, many years after the move down there. But, you want to look at, do I have the resources necessary? And I have to plan, and I have to have the resources available to be able to live that third age and on into the fourth age as effectively as possible. And then we also have to understand what are the legal protections that we have. So again, this is where having access to legal aid organizations or senior advocacy groups can help to give us some guidance on that. And I think one of the things that we need to have on this podcast a little bit more is a few more guests that are more versed in the housing opportunities and the planning for both the financial and the legal sides of moving through third age into fourth age. We had Todd Youngdahl, who is the financial planner who Pam and I have used for years, on episode 15. And financial security is not only a right, but it is essential for aging well.
Absolutely. Older individuals have the right to financial security, including access to pensions, social security benefits, and other forms of income support. They should be protected against poverty, economic exploitations, and financial abuse.
Yeah, and again, this is something that really begins in second age, if not even sooner, in terms of planning financially. We would talk frequently with our kids about saving money and how what money you save now, how much that can multiply over the years. Too often, we don't start planning for retirement until we get near retirement, and it's important, I think, to really be considering that as we are in first age, moving into second age, and certainly being well versed in what our financial needs are and how to plan financially once we are nearing that third age.
I don't think people realize how expensive it is to live inside of a assisted living or residential home either. It's really really eye-opening. So the advice that you're giving of doing that research, I stand behind that as well, because it is it's really alarming when an individual is making that milestone decision of, hey, I need help and I need to be placed in a facility where someone can kind of help assist take care of me. And then you take your loved one to that, and they tell you all the things that they offer, and then they bring you into the office and they break down the price per month, and it's whoa, this is so much. So do your research. Some is a flat rate, some only take Medicare or Medicaid, and some go off of a point system, meaning the healthier you are, you pay way less. The more things that you have going on with you, well, you're going to pay a lot more.
And we need to be focused on financial literacy early on in life. Really, that should be things that are being taught to our young people in the first age, so that they're not going off to college and getting degrees that are completely useless and not going to be able to make any money off of those. How to put away money so that they can prepare for the future. How to kind of delay gratification in many ways. I mean, we spend way too much money that could be saved for those final years. So obviously, older individuals do have that right to financial security. I am not a big fan of pensions. I think they are somewhere between a Ponzi scam and a pyramid scam when it comes to how they're set up, where they're really relying on people continuing to pay into those. And a lot of people have gotten kind of screwed out of their pensions, but also, in some regards, some of these pensions really screw the people below them because, people are retiring making huge amounts of money in their pensions. And a lot of people get dependent upon those pensions, and they haven't really prepared financially because, oh, I know I have this pension coming, and then that pension fund falls apart, then they're screwed. And so they really need to understand, what do they have access to based on their retirement plans and their work? What is some of the government provided benefits? How to advocate for those? And Social Security, I think, is another somewhat of a Ponzi scam as well, but I think an essential tool that we have in our society to help to somewhat protect our older populations. What other assistance that they might have for healthcare benefits, for providing assistance for low income food benefits, how to get healthy food. There's a lot of different opportunities that are available there. And I think it's very important to, as best of our ability, to consult financial advisors, consult elder lawyers for guidance that are going to help them to manage their resources most effectively as they age well.
Lastly, of course, older individuals have the right to be treated with dignity, respect, and without discrimination based on their age. Their human rights should be upheld and protected, and they should not face ageism and age-based stereotypes.
Absolutely. And again, it comes down to advocacy, awareness, and engaging policymakers. They got to age, they have to advocate for themselves. We've talked a little bit about some of the ageism and stereotypes when we talked about don't call me a senior citizen. But we want to and I hope we're doing it on this podcast, is kind of promoting a more positive narrative about aging, and that there is importance in having dignity as we age and being respectful of older adults.
So, in conclusion, these rights, the right to health, the right to autonomy and self determination, the right to safety and security, the right to social inclusion and participation, the right to housing and adequate standard of living, the right to financial security, the right to dignity and respect, this all contributes to promoting the well being, autonomy, and quality of life of older individuals, enabling them to age with dignity and maintain their rights as they grow older and age well.
Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.